those I've not met, my name is Father Dominic Langevin. I'm the Dean here at the House of Studies. It's our honor to welcome all of you for our faculty's convocation. As Brad mentioned, this was organized by the Council of Deans when we started talking about this back in the spring. AI is something that everyone's talking about these days, and it could be something that we could have a good conversation about, sharing our various experiences and also our theological traditions on something that's pertinent for us as teachers, as faculty members, and something that certainly is alive in the academic experiences of our students. To that end, we're also happy to welcome those using our technology, our artificial technology here at the House of Studies. So welcome all those in Zoom land, as well as welcome those who've been here before to the House of Studies and those who are new. So again, our honor and pleasure to have you with us this evening. I hope you'll be able to get to know the school a bit better through your presence here. And I know there's some goodies that are waiting for us later. But without further ado, so we can get to our rich conversation, but then also our rich goodies, and pass things over to Larry. Dr. Coleman.
Thank you, Father Langevin, and I want to thank Dean Langevin and also President Father Legge for hosting us this year. It's been a real delight to be here at the PFIC, Typical Faculty at the Immaculate Conception at the Dominican House. It's the longest name, so y'all get that medal for sure, along with many other illustrious qualities. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. John Slattery is the executive director of the Carl Breckenstedt Center for Ethics in Science, Technology, and Law at Duquesne. I was particularly interested in the law portion, and we'll hear more about that. As a Calvinist, we're into the law, but anyway, that's another topic. An ethicist, theologian, and historian of science, Dr. Slattery works at the many intersections of technology, science, theology, and racism. And that kind of intersectionality in theological studies it's increasing, but he's been working at this for some time. It's very impressive. Dr. Slattery earned a BS in computer science from Georgetown, so he knows our area. A master's degree in theology from St. Paul School of Theology. That's in Minnesota?
Kansas City.
Kansas City, thank you. Okay, wrong St. Paul, gotcha. And interdisciplinary PhD in the history and philosophy of science and systematic theology from the University of Notre Dame. He is the author of a wide range of essays in print, online, and monograph Faith and Science at Notre Dame, an award-winning book on the history of debates about evolution in the Catholic Church. This would really interest, I think, Father Jim, many of the science and religion people we've had over the years, wouldn't it? That's been a very big topic for them in the consortium. Dr. Slattery is also the editor of the T&T Clark Handbook of Christian Theology and Modern Sciences, and producer of many short films, including Humans and Race, exploring the intersections of science and racism. Dr. Slattery currently serves both as an expert advisor for the nonprofit AI and Faith. I've heard those people speak, the Museum of the Bible, very impressive group, as well as on the AI research group at the Vatican Dicastery on Culture and Education, through which he co-authored the volume Encountering Artificial Intelligence. Previous to his work at Duquesne, Dr. Slattery directed the Science of Seminaries grant program, where he helped bring science and technology conversations to dozens of Christian seminaries. We had several recipients in the consortium, and it was a remarkable program, just remarkable. When I saw liberation in the title, I thought we have a real pioneer, because we're already doing liberation theology for AI. But no, I asked him about this, and he said, wait, that's not, no, what we're doing is we are bringing AI critically and constructively to the ministry of the church, reminding the church of its commitment to the poor and the marginalized. So I offer you Dr. Slattery.
for having me here. And I hate to contradict you immediately, but we are going to do some liberation theology here this evening. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Well, I meant for AI. I thought you were just way out. Liberation theology for AI.
Well, we might do that too.
Okay.
We might. Let's just see. Let's see what happens. All right. Okay. So, as Larry said, my name is John Slattery. I'm at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, but I actually commute from DC. So it actually wasn't because I worked here for AAAS downtown, and then in the middle of the pandemic, Duquesne was starting up this new center, wanted me on board, and then invited me to become the director. And I said, that's great, but my family's here. And they said, okay, it's a new world. So I've been commuting a couple times a month for the last several years. Teach a number of classes there. We run a big conference every fall. Actually have some flyers here if you want. We have our big AI conference right here in the bottom, November 6th and 7th this year. So it'll be live in person in Pittsburgh, but also live stream the entire 2-day conference. So free to register. Feel free to pick up one of those. It's also another general flyer about the kind of stuff that we do. We have an annual research scholars program where we meet monthly with scholars from around the country. We have undergraduate scholarships, we have credential programs, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of great stuff going on at Duquesne and all the work that we're doing. So as I was joking, this title, the talk, I titled AI Theology and Liberation, Reimagining Technology and Theological Education. And one of the reasons I did this, I give a lot of talks on AI, but given the audience here, I did want to push a little bit theologically and try to offer something a little bit new. I've been around a lot of conversations of Christian theology and AI and heard a lot of takes and a lot of different things. And so I've been mulling something over for a while, and I've taken the opportunity for this talk to try it out and see how it goes. So I'll leave it to you to be the judge of that. All right, like any good sermon, I have organized my talk around 3 major topics so you can remember it clearly in the end, which I have labeled generally redefine, resist, and redeem. Along the way, I've made sure to include many pieces that are intended to provoke conversation and perhaps disagreement so that everyone has something to discuss for the rest of the evening. So we'll start with the first topic, redefine. Now, in order to talk about AI, I always find it helpful to take a step back and examine the role of technology in relationship to modern society. So many people want to jump into defining AI itself that we actually miss the bigger question, what is technology itself? Now, the most common approach to technology is to approach any device we have as a tool that we could use for good or ill, much like a broom, a hammer, or this mouse right here. This definition assumes a neutrality to the technological artifact. Artifacts are simply created things meant to serve a purpose for humanity. A hammer is a wonderful tool for construction, but can also be used for assault. You can sweep with a broom, or you can shoo away a cat, etc., etc. But this default stance of neutrality begins to break down when technology increases in complexity. Right? A broom is a relatively neutral tool, but what about a cell phone? Applying this logic of neutrality to complex technologies like the cell phone or social media generates unhelpfully bifurcated questions. Is social media good or bad? Are cell phones positive or negative? Questions that really unhelpfully set up this dichotomy that doesn't really give us any good information about what's going on. So the difficulty of assigning neutrality then to higher forms of technology, going as high as a factory, a power plant, a nuclear bomb, a television, necessitates a redefinition of technology away from neutrality and an admission that technology has never been and will never be neutral. So let's take a relatively simple example of a book, right? Something quickly going out of style in this modern day. But if you take a printed book off the shelf and hold it in your hand, this book holds thousands of years of human history that created the piece of technology, which is paper, ink, and bookbinding. I take with that book the people that have also created the means of production of producing the technology of that book, and the people that have produced the ideas upon which the book rests. That book also holds within it the entire history of language, not just the particular language the book is in, but the idea of language itself, the evolutionary movement from humans, from communicative animals to complex oral cultures of early humans, from cave drawings to syllabic and finally phonetic alphabets. So this book carries, in other words, the entire history of the written word and the entire history of the means of production that have been refined over centuries to bring a book into being. The book is both a very simple piece of technology, much like this paper, and a highly enculturated artifact that is dependent upon thousands of years of technological development. So let's use this logic to look at then at cell phones. Cell phones are entirely a product of human values. This is not a groundbreaking statement, right? Consider the human-specific nature, right? The phone size versus I have really big hands, but so it actually fits in my hand really well. Some people complain about it, but phones are meant to fit in somebody's hand, right? The ability to play movies or sounds, display text, all of these are products of very specific human values. If we philosophize the phone like the book, the capacity of the cell phone to generate a wide range of media means that it carries with it the values of the culture across the disciplines. It has removed the technology of paper and ink and replaced it with simulations of both, requiring our human abilities of abstraction in order to access the reality behind the language, art, music, and videos that are portrayed on the small device. Additionally, the device builds upon centuries of progress in technologies of telecommunications, which require literal wires across the floor of the Pacific Ocean, a vast network of metal and fiber optic cables around the world, on and under the ground, connected to wireless devices in outer space, in orbit, as well as in about every single mile in approximately every single city around the world, which are then connected to increasing numbers of data centers and warehouses. So sometimes when we talk about AI or digital things not having a body, I like to push back. I'm like, well, they do have a body. It just looks really different. They are made up of physical things, or pieces of the earth. So this one little piece of technology carries with it the value of the entire global telecommunication system in its wake. To use my phone is to use that system. And the degree to which that system is invisible is built into the device itself. It is an intentional act of invisibility meant to create an illusion of magic, to distract us from the labor, the machines, and the people that participate in the construction of the piece of technology along the way. So in the same way, artificial intelligence, at yet another level of complexity above cell phones, presents us with several layers of cultural values. So first, because any AI engine depends upon the internet and communication architecture, they carry the same values and histories of cell phones themselves. Second, because they depend upon human-created data for training purposes, large language models, right, which are a subset of general artificial intelligence that generates language and all the movies and images and all other stuff, they carry with them the explicit values of human cultures from the past and the present. Importantly, these models carry with them the values of these cultures as expressed on the internet and through books, videos, images, sounds, and news publications that are accessible. Large language models like ChatGPT thus inhabit cultural values implicitly like cell phones and explicitly through their use of data sets of cultural outputs. So this explicit cultural value marks language models like ChatGPT as something really different. And it's important to recognize that while all AI systems are predictive, right? So Google Maps uses AI. They use large data sets to predict future outcomes. Not all AI systems rely upon human artifacts of language and art, right? Some are used to predict gameplay, like a chess engine, or the thing that won the Nobel Prize that sort of rearranged molecular arrangements of proteins, or to find the fastest way home in traffic. Not all AI systems are made the same, and not all AI systems carry the same values. So from books to phones to AI, technologies inhabit the values of the people and cultures around them. But the inhabiting of values is not a one-way street for technology. Technology, as soon as it's created, begins to then impress values upon culture that culture did not previously have. Continuing with the example of the cell phone, the downfall of print media, for example, newspapers specifically, began with the laptop and the internet, but it was crushed by the cell phone. this is just one way that cell phones have transformed culture itself, a transformation which has little to do with the original design of the telephone in the early 20th century, little to do with the original design of the telegraph. So culture determines technology, which in turn determines culture. This argument, again, is not a new argument. In fact, this one's way more prevalent than the first one, that technology inhabits values. And this one is so prevalent that cell phones and AI transform culture that it often leads to a kind of atavistic reckoning. The wishing we could all return back to the close-knit communities of the Middle Ages, or the fully in-person office spaces of 2018. In fact, the current cell phone discussion around young people really exemplifies this. If anybody's read very popular author Jonathan Haidt, and he argues that cell phones and social media are depriving kids of outside play, the kind of ideal American life that he experienced in the 70s and 80s. But such approaches, like Haidt's, like most atavisms, ignore both the specificity of history and the reality that human culture is defined by change. So this play outside culture that Haidt and a lot of others sort of opine for really just reflects the carefully mowed lawns of the second half of the 20th century and was a specific iteration of American suburbia, largely dominated by white middle-class families, often freeing the racial integration of big cities. The culture was not present in rural communities or inner cities or other countries in the same way. And it was also directly preceded by cultures where children worked on a regular basis, sometimes sent to factories, sometimes learning the local trade. A few generations before that, children simply grew up and worked in the family shop or the farm or helped take over the family business, which served a small local community. So were children happier in the 1970s than in the 1620s, than at the time of Jesus? Atavistic ideals often get in the way of messy realities of the past and the present. This is not to say that all kids should have unlimited cell phone use. My children will tell you I do not believe in that in the slightest. But that we should be really careful how faulty philosophies of technology and society can lead us to false ideals and false movements about how we should use our tech. So by redefining our view of technology, we can begin to see it as something that is evolving alongside society, like a chain link, right? Where one link interlocks with another. So culture produces technology through its values, which then gives rise to a different culture with new values, which then produces new technology, which gives rise to another culture, and so on and so forth. So humans are known and are defined even by their technologies, like Iron Age, Bronze Age, Industrial Age, Nuclear Age, Digital Age. Technology and humanity are co-evolutionary forces. So this redefinition leads directly to my second point, which is resist. Ethical approaches to modern technology generally fall into two categories. First, and by far the most popular, is called applied ethics. So now that a computer can do X, what are the ethical implications of X? So you can find this everywhere, from self-driving cars to cell phones to drones, social media, and generative AI like ChatGPT. So for this generative AI, applied ethical concerns are pretty easily seen through a whole bunch of AI principles and frameworks published over the last few years. You'll see concepts like privacy, security, transparency and explainability, accountability, or reliability. There'll be a whole bunch of them. And there is not a single chatbot today that fulfills the ethical principles of any framework, though a lot of companies like Microsoft, Google, and Salesforce will publicize their own frameworks as ideals to which they aim. But none of them will fulfill it, and you can drill into any of them and you can see how this is going. But if AI, like all technology, is a co-evolutionary entity that develops alongside humanity, then we have to acknowledge a second approach to AI, which is often called a socio-technical ethical approach. So this approach covers a host of issues not easily boiled down to principles or frameworks, but instead is related to the production, development, and implementation of new technologies. So since the advent of ChatGPT in 2022, this field has grown precipitously and includes things like energy demands and environmental impacts of AI and data centers, It includes the humans who train generative AI, labor displacement and labor practices of big tech, things like supply chain ethics and mining practices in places like Indonesia, military and wartime uses of AI, biases and prejudices in both datasets and practice, the cultural effects of AI as companions, such as the very tragic thing that teen suicide that was in the news a couple of weeks ago from ChatGPT, just in the news last month. I think that lawsuit is still ongoing. But this combination of applied and socio-technical ethics presents a picture of AI as a technological artifact that carries some of the most destructive values in modern culture. To illustrate two examples. First, studies are continuing to show that students who rely on chatbots to do homework and write essays engage in a practice called cognitive offloading, leading to a decline in critical thinking skills over time. So what this means is instead of offloading menial tasks, right, like spelling and grammar, like we all did in Microsoft Word back in 2003, we humans, now that we have a machine that can do a little more, tend to offload the more difficult tasks of thinking, organizing, planning, constructing, coming up with new ideas. And it happens so easily and it's so quickly done that this offloading ends up statistically significant a decrease of critical thinking abilities in definite ways over time. And this has started to be shown in study after study, especially among young people using generative AI. So second, generative AI systems have always been and will continue to be inherently biased. Now part of this is just how it's designed, right? An AI system is designed to be sort of an efficient measure of something else. And you can think about it like plotting something on a graph, right? If you have an X and Y basic graph, you're plotting a bunch of points and you generate a two-dimensional line. Well, an AI engine is essentially working in hundreds and often thousands of dimensions. So instead of 2, instead of 3 dimensions, they just keep going. And there's so many dimensions to calculate that the line upon which they're calculating is extremely precise. But just like a two-dimensional line, it's still a biased line. Now it can be biased for all sorts of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be biased in the same way that we humans are. But it is biased. It's built into this efficiency algorithm. And so because of this approximation, AI regularly produces inaccurate results as truth, as we all know, with errors and false citations in 50% or more of chatbot responses. Now that doesn't mean that you'll see like a gobbledygook response, but that means in about half your responses, something in there will almost certainly be wrong. And it'll be up to you to figure out what that something is. Studies have also shown that chatbots tend to actually exacerbate cultural biases instead of softening them for reasons we don't actually know. So part of the deal with AI is that you have these thousands of different nodes and all these different angles that they're sort of calculating on, but people can't actually go in and say, oh, it gave you this answer because node number 1, 2, 3, 4 kicked back something else. The calculations are actually extremely obtuse and we can't really see. And so these chatbots are actually more racist, sexist, and otherwise than the literature they represent. And the only way to remove the biases, the only way we can actually go on Gemini and Anthropic and whatever, is because they are training thousands of hours of human-aided training are happening all the time, where poorly treated individuals in developing countries tell the AI how to respond or not respond based upon countless queries. And actually 60 Minutes the other night did a whole special on this, on one of the training centers for AI. I forget what country it was in, but it was sort of the same thing again. Yeah, it was people just sit in a room for 8 hours a day and they look at terrible images and they have to respond to terrible queries and just tell the AI over and over again. So instead of old school where you program, don't respond this way or don't respond this way, we're essentially asking the AI, hey, please don't do this. Please don't do that. And then we sort of get the result of what comes back. So of all the digital technologies in the past century, of all simulacra of humanities and human intelligence, generative AI stands alone as uniquely inhuman. AI is painting and writing songs while we still drive gasoline-powered cars on dangerous highways and fold the laundry and do the dishes. The AI age is in some ways the dark opposite of the cartoon world of the Jetsons, right? Where the robot servants were out there doing everything, and they had fast, safe transportation in like little pods across the city. But in our world, humans are doing all the menial labor, while AI is translating half the internet and making movies, which are becoming sort of colloquially known as like AI slop, and it's like all over the place. But in reality, all this AI stuff is simply derivative simulations of humanity's creative labor. And so because of this, my second point is one of resistance. Resistance is the true application of the ethical norms broadly defined as the ethics of applied technology and exemplified through countless frameworks, approaches, principles, and blueprints for AI ethics. Most of these frameworks hold so loosely to broad ideals that they remain either impossible to implement or lack any reasonable will to do so. Yet if their ideals were pushed to the reasonable limit, they would represent a safety web behind which everyday citizens could rest. Principles like safety, security, accountability, privacy, etc. are helpful to the point of mindless oblivion when all corporations and government agree to these terms, and yet all evidence points to the same entities resisting any real application of such terms from any regulation or any government decree. When this happens, the logical response would be to cast the entire ethical system into the trash. And this might seem a little extreme, to these principles that were proffered to help keep tech companies at least a little bit responsible for what would otherwise be a meaningless space of tech autonomy. And the principles, so the argument goes, can guide researchers and well-meaning students to create the next generation of technological innovations. They can help governments and policy-making bodies create guide rails, etc., etc. And yet simultaneously, these blueprints provide cover for corporate and government overreach, claiming to give heed to such principles with no promise of real accountability, especially in 2025. These ethical principles, like all principles, are aspirational at best and ethics washing at their worst. And in the end, when the market clashes with ethics, the market will always win. So resistance demands a recognition of the inhumanity of artificial intelligence and pushes back on all applications by the incessant calls of the market. So drawing from the dual facets of AI to both mimic the artistic input of humans and to specifically deteriorate the critical thinking abilities of users, generative AI is, I think, an anti-educational tool, despite what all the press releases say. As an interactive dictionary or encyclopedia, and probably it's been to all of us here, one could imagine it can be helpful. But if you consider the difference between AI and an actual dictionary or curated encyclopedia whose biases are clearly labeled or can at least be figured out, whose authors are named, and whose inaccuracies can be held to account, you come up with some questions like, when the AI gives you wrong information about the Reformation per se, who can hold the information to account? Who can see the source, contact the author, spot the error? Who can publish a new version of the AI with correct data? Or write a book that refutes what an AI says? Information without context is the point of an AI, and information without context is largely useless, simulating an idea of objectivity while offering regular falsehoods and biases. Now, information ingested, of course, is precious knowledge, forming a person pebble by pebble, building cathedrals with ideas and universities with interconnections. Human limitations are known, loved, and survived. Their transparencies and duplicities are evident. But the productions of a generative AI are naturally inhuman, stripped of all these attributes, and predicted for your or your employer's enjoyment and satisfaction. So resistance then means pushing back not only the AI that doesn't work, the predictive AI that's making its way into admissions offices, parole boards, policing, and employment searches, but also on the AI that replaces that which makes us human, or art, poetry, music, and prose. Resistance also includes the resistance of AI in education, and the resistance to pull people to use AI because people claim they will need it on the job market. Resist the replacement of teachers by AI, and resist the replacement of human-created lessons plans by AI. Resist the creation of sermons by AI, God love it, right? And resist the siren song of efficiency. which drives the AI hype engine. And finally, resist the ways that AI is already using and rewriting how we play, write, pray, think, and act on a daily basis. Now I think it's past time to admit that we're already talking about theology. And the rest of this talk, that's what I wanted to really devote it to. There is no escaping the fact that technology defines humanity, but technology has not and will not redeem humanity. And that's the third point of my talk. After redefinition and resistance, I want to talk a bit about redemption. In my AI ethics class every semester, I teach the writings of Gustavo Gutierrez, a Peruvian priest who's one of the founders of the movement known as liberation theology, along with many other people. Gutierrez explains liberation theology as both a simple return to the writings of Jesus and a reconsideration of theology's duty to society and to the world. His basic argument, that many of you probably know better than I do, is that theology in the church more broadly is meant to focus on those downtrodden, forgotten, and oppressed by society. Faith should not be a tool of the powerful, and the idea of Jesus should not be a vessel for celebrating violence. Instead, Christian theology demands that our individual salvation is inextricably interwoven with the liberation of others in the here and now. Liberation theology speaks of God's preferential option for the poor, as repeated throughout Scripture, through the care of widows and orphans, the parable of the sheep and the goats, Mary's Magnificat, the last shall be first, etc. Liberation theology aims to return us to the heart of the gospel. If the gospel is not good news for the oppressed, it is good news to no one. So when it comes to modern technology, theological voices have been present, if relatively quiet from the beginning. Technological reflections with theology find their origin in people like the French philosopher Jacques Ellul, and continuing all the way into the 21st century with people like Noreen Hertzfeld, Brian Greene, and even, of course, Pope Francis. Christian theologians have been writing about the development of AI for at least 20 years, considering various ethical and anthropological angles. In many of these writings, and in many of the discussions that I've been a part of, I feel like the ethical norms I've already outlined above, largely determined by secular groups, already represent, as I said, a higher bar than anyone in the tech industry can possibly reach, especially when you start discussing socio-technical ethics of supply chains and ecological impacts, etc. What more can theology offer, besides a confirmation of social justice and human dignity, and a few notes about theological anthropology when people start trying to baptize robots? So, it happens, those conversations, every time. Nevertheless, to approach technology through a framework of liberation theology begins with the dual ethical approaches above, examining both the existing technologies as well as the means and production and development of the technologies, moving into the ways in which technology is formed by and forms society itself. Liberation theology is inherently eschatological, demanding neither just an ethical framework, nor a new Bible AI app, nor simply a call to resistance. Theology demands that we understand the way in which technology co-evolves with society, and that we imagine the world in which all oppression shall cease, and that we work to hope for and create such a world in the here and now. Now, the application of this type of theology, of this liberation theology, forces us then to redefine and thus resist technology as an interwoven web of control that technological innovation has created. The reality is that the military-industrial complex in the 1950s has become dominated by digital technology and artificial intelligence, with the merger of capitalism, politics, and AI relatively complete in 2025 in the second Trump administration. Recently, just in the last few months, companies like Google and Meta and even Microsoft have disposed of previous internal rules against AI in military usage, and pro-military AI companies are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in new venture capitalist funding and U.S. military contracts. In fact, at one of the conferences I was at last week, they estimated that new AI funding in 2025 will come in around $250 billion across the industry, which is just a startling amount of money. AI hype has also merged with America First Language, creating an amalgamation of support for unregulated AI development, both for the salvation of humanity and the military domination of the United States' digital capacity. The result of this merger between big tech and the US military, which has been going on for a long time, reveals a new urgency for liberation theology. The danger of AI extends far beyond technology itself, far beyond the ways in which we outsource our own and our students' critical thinking and commitment to educational formation. The danger of AI, then, is the way in which those who control such technology will seek to use it to analyze and control everything, to offload decisions to an opaque digital process, and to claim that doing so is making the world more fair and more just. But there is no evidence to support this claim, just as there is no evidence to support that AI actually improves education. But there is plenty of evidence to support the claim that wedding deregulated science and tech to military aims increases the threat to violence worldwide, in the same way that owning a gun in your own home significantly increases the chance that someone in your house will die of gun violence. The myth of a technological redemption is strong and pervasive. Why else would states allow the building of new nuclear power plants, an inherently dangerous technology, and why else would investors be sinking hundreds of billions of dollars into AI in 2025? The promoters of AI promise to redeem the world, and who among us does not want the world redeemed? So there are but a few pieces of holiness left in this modern technological society. Holiness that we aspire to in our relationships to each other, to ourselves, to our communities, to nature, and to God. So this holiness, of course, is found not in power, but in brokenness and humility, and it's only in this place that we can find redemption. The God of liberation sees this place, calls to this place, and asks to make revolutionaries, in other words, Christians, of us all. For in a world where the name of Jesus comes from the mouth of warmongers, and where Christians identify more readily with violence than with peace, the only true path of redemption is the path of liberation. Now, in the 2,000-year tradition of Christian theology, all manners of people have come to follow Christ, and all manners of communities have prayed and broken bread. We live in a time where technological innovation actively seeks to subsume the world for the sake of the powerful, a subsumation which can only end in more violence. The world of big AI promises infinite surveillance, prediction, and efficiency, but which in reality only serves as a proxy for control. There is no evidence for an AI redemption. A theology of liberation begins and ends with the quiet poverty in our streets and our lives. It centers the experiences and persons in poverty not to glorify the poor, but to reorient a cultural pull towards wealth, prosperity, and power. To apply such a theology to AI seems like trying to uproot an oak tree or move a mountain with a prayer. Now, with all this, I don't mean to diminish any hope in the efficacious use of AI and AI algorithms for medicinal and other positive tasks. Nuclear technology, that vast technology of death, created power plants, which, despite their many, many problems, do actually provide us with energy for health and life and society. Nothing is fully irredeemable. But I think the poet Audre Lorde is correct. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Any usage of AI that hopes to redeem, to liberate, is simultaneously operating and supporting an inherently broken system of technological, military, hegemonic power. Now, we all support and act in flawed systems, right? And we stand no chance if we give up the argument, give up the fight. Hope found is still hope found. An AI system, for example, that helps to find lost children, gives sight to the blind, identifies cancers earlier, offers solutions for increased human dignity, or helps connect people across the globe, is still hope. They're still positive things, but they don't change the game. They don't change the system. Matthew 17:20, Jesus says, "If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move." The faith and liberation theology is the kernel of the mustard seed that holds hope despite the vastness of evidence to the contrary. It is found in conversation, in prayer, and in action through love, empathy, and solidarity. It often loses battles. It often loses wars, for its power is literally not of this world. And yet it and its siblings, hope and love, are all that matter in the end, even in this new age of AI. AI, by definition, is an engine of efficiency. The gospel, if it is anything, is inefficient. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll stay here. That sounds great. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Slattery. Profound and earth-shaking presentation. We will take questions from anyone who has them. And what I'm going to ask is that Dr. Slattery, if you don't mind, just repeating the question. Sure. And we can. What do you need? Oh, okay. Oh, for the audience. Yeah. Well, if not, let's see. I don't see them here. Well, but just repeat the question, and then you can answer. Yeah, great. And please, let's try to have questions. Not sermons.
Yes, please.
So for most of your argument, I had the impression that you were suggesting that generative AI is necessarily inhumane. And then right at the end, it sounded like you were arguing it's inevitably inhumane. Stuffing a little hope in there. But I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
And so is it a matter of as it stands, or it's inevitable, or even, more likely than not? Or are we genuinely suggesting it's necessarily so?
Yeah, so can the people hear now with the microphone? So the question is now, right, whether generative AI is by necessity or inevitably or some combination of the two. I think my basic argument goes that the architecture behind generative AI is based upon architecture that was actually designed in the 1980s and 90s called neural networks. And it's essentially an architecture that takes a large amount of data, which is why we can do it now, and starts to build connections between that data, and then feeds those connections back into the computer over and over and over again, and tells the computer to feed itself until it generates meaningful relationships between those things. Well, this architecture, by definition, is what produces the kind of generative AI we have now. It's what produces all the different dimensional angles I was talking about. It's what inherently produces all the hallucinations, the false outputs, as well as the biases. And I think my argument is that because, like, when you start doing that with large data sets, you end up with problematic pieces that you have to account for because they're data sets. You have to say, okay, well, this algorithm is going to give us sort of 20% error because X, Y, Z. But when you start doing that with things like cultural artifacts like language and movies and everything else, that's when the inhumanity comes in, right? That's when the inhumanity is sort of built into the architecture. And that's what I was trying to differentiate between generative AI that does build on these cultural artifacts, these creative artifacts, and sort of a general AI like a mapping software that's inefficient. We've used AI around DC, we know that's a fact, but can sometimes produce good things and have interesting results to it. Now, the real answer is nobody has any idea if generative AI can actually cross that threshold and get rid of some of those things. Based on the current architecture, I don't think it's possible. But there are plenty of people that disagree with me very strongly. Google this right now, people that are predicting that superintelligence will come around within 5 years, no question. I do not think that is true. The last 20 years of research have not led to that seeming to be true. And so that's where that sort of line comes in.
So just as an example, that issue of accountability is an expression of that inhumanity that, for now at least, is certainly necessarily built in.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and a great example is what OpenAI is trying to do with this teen suicide staff.
Yeah.
OpenAI is like, well, this is not, we didn't design it for this, we weren't trying to do this, they're trying to build up this legal argument because in the end they actually have no idea why their AI responded like it did. I'm certain it wasn't supposed to respond like that. And that's their argument for. So it's all these complications that it's a knot that we can't really pull out ourselves.
So John, if you can repeat the question, evidently they can't quite hear you.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
No problem.
So if, as you said, there are billions and billions of dollars for AI's use in what we generally call the industrial military complex, and if the people behind that are themselves getting richer and richer, what likelihood is there that they will heed the kind of warning that you're giving us? That you need a degree of conversion there that seems unlikely.
I'm happy to repeat that question. Okay, so the question is, there's hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on AI within the military-industrial complex, and all these people are getting richer. How likely are they to heed these types of warnings? The answer is very unlikely. It's far more likely that they will eventually heed the economic warnings, but I think the idea that you can spend this much has probably put us back into like an early .com bubble, that at some point the bubble is going to burst and people are going to be sort of like reading this again and figuring all this other stuff out. I mean, that's why I used the mustard seed example at the end, right? I don't think there's a whole bunch of hope, right, in this exact moment for a big conversion of Silicon Valley. It certainly hasn't happened anytime recently. I do think there is some movement among people to start to recognize this inhumanity. Back in 2022 when everything launched, everything was positive about AI. People were so excited. We're going to start to see these error rates go down as it gets better. It's going to be more precise. It's going to be less biased. But the reality is not really, right? I mean, if a lot of you here are teachers, if people use AIs are getting better at sort of simulating human essays, but they're not really getting a ton better in terms of like getting rid of all the, of all the errors and doing all these other pieces and getting rid of the biases. And so I think there's starting to be some general pushback against that. There was another 15 minutes of this talk that I did not include, that when I talk at Duquesne, I often use the phrases of empowerment and education, right? We are here to educate people on what's going on and to empower people in the communities in which they live. We're all part of communities, whether it's our family, our school, our colleagues, etc. And in those communities, we can make decisions, and those decisions have real impacts, right? As my children will tell you, our decisions about AI and cell phones have real impacts. And what those mean. So I think we can be empowered to do that. We cannot control whether or not the government gives a $100 million contract to somebody else to make another AI drone for the battlefield. But we can control what we're doing here, and that's not nothing. So that's at least the beginning. The other things, we have the power that we have, but we can at least have a little bit of control over where we are in community, and we can certainly help to empower others around us.
Fascinating talk. Isn't there a risk, though, if we take this almost symbolic approach of refraining from AI, that we might also lose our ability to speak into a more humane or justice-oriented approach to the development of AI? I mean, maybe the hope that we can speak into it at all is almost absurd at this point, given the vast complex of influences that are shaping us from economy to the military industrial complex. But it does seem that if we aren't at least using AI at some level, we won't be able to speak to it at all. And that would be something that I'd be worried about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't... Oh, sorry. So the question is there a danger that if we refrain from using AI, we sort of give up that voice to potentially sort of critique or make AI better? First of all, I don't think you have much of a voice even if you're using AI in terms of how to critique these bigger systems. I do think there is something to be said for knowing. I wouldn't have been able to do the research for this if I had not sort of been embedded in these discussions of AI for the last 5 years very deeply, and read lots about it and used it and tried these things, and so I definitely use AI systems. I think the difference, I think you can use AI systems with things in mind, right? The other day, my son, who really loves mystery books, but doesn't really like contemporary young adult mystery books, I was trying to convince him to read some original Sherlock Holmes, which he found relatively boring. And I said, you gotta be a little wary, it's sort of sexist and a little racist. And so, but as long as you realize these things, like, you can read Sherlock Holmes and appreciate it. And he pushed back, and I was like, well, we have graphic novels of Sherlock Holmes that sort of remove all that for you. And I think that's actually a little worse. It's a little worse to read sort of a cleaned up Sherlock Holmes because you don't really understand the weight of the history behind it. So I think in the same way, if we're using AI in recognition of all these pieces, and then we are using this to analyze, to critique, to make society better, that's a very different thing. I think it's only if we use this technology without this awareness, and if we use it, right, if you are aware that when you open an AI, you're going to be tempted to offload your critical thinking skills, you're going to do a lot better at protecting that, at that piece. And in fact, that's what studies have shown, is that people that are like 40 and older, who have already generated these skills and appreciate this, are less likely to offload their critical thinking skills. Actually, the younger generation that's more likely, because those skills have not been developed over the last couple of decades. So I'm not really calling for a sort of a full Amish backing out of, I'm the last person that should be doing that. That would be very hypocritical of me. But I think it is a transparent usage of technology is sort of what's needed in order to get to that next stage, whatever that stage is. Another question? Oh, here.
Yeah, thank you so much for also clarifying now your position, because it was sounding to me kind of pushing AI back, but I think it doesn't work. I remember when I was in seminary, the rector also tried to push internet back from us.
Yeah.
So the other question is more in this direction: how can we use AI in a positive way? So I am in the German Liturgical Institute, and we have just now the question whether we should feed magisterium AI with things of the liturgical reform, so that it gives appropriate answers based on the historical data. So that's a question that we were just discussing that. But what is your take on magisterium AI, for instance?
Yeah, so the general question is what is my take on essentially AI tools that are hoping to sort of serve as evangelical or knowledge bases within a tradition, like magisterium AI. There's a whole bunch of ones. The Episcopals have one that's called Ask Kathy. There's a Jesus.ai. There's a bunch of other ones. My approach has been pretty hesitant. I think they're honestly pretty dangerous tools. I'm torn, right? So I work with an interfaith group in Baltimore that's considering trying to improve answers about interfaith questions on chatbots. And on the one hand, I really appreciate it because people do ask these questions of chatbots. They will go on chatbots and they'll ask them, hey, what does your tradition say about X? And so people are asking the questions there. If we can make those questions, the answers just a little bit better, like that's not a bad thing to do. And there's part of me that's 100% in that space, and that's sort of what I hinted at the end of the talk. Like, that's not a bad thing to have a little bit of hope and do that. But you do have to do it with eyes wide open, because that magisterium AI, I know generally the people that are doing this and have been in some conversations, they have a lot more confidence in the abilities of this tool than what this tool can ever do. This tool will never actually be a fully accurate encyclopedia. It will get things wrong, it will leave things off, and it does have inherent biases. And the even further danger of a tool like magisterium.ai is that the biases can actually be so focused on the creators of the tool itself. Because the way that chatbots work, right, is that before you ask a single question, let's use ChatGPT. ChatGPT has like 10,000 questions it's responding to it before responding to yours. It's questions and statements, like don't use this type of language, don't do this. When they ask for this, do this. When they do this, and it has a whole bunch of queries that come before any question you ask. and this is true with anything, I guarantee you Magisterium.ai has a bunch of stuff because they didn't train that itself. It's based upon one of the big, what are called foundational models. There's only about a dozen or 2 dozen foundational models on the internet that are of public use because they're super expensive to make. Right? To build a new foundational model itself costs something like $100,000, uses as much energy as like an entire car's lifespan. Right? So these aren't super easy. So Magisterium.ai uses a foundational model like ChatGPT or like Copilot or Anthropic, and then builds and then feeds it a bunch of magisterial documents and says, okay, use these as your basic knowledge, and then come out with answers. So I'm very wary of these types of things, not because they can't be sort of fun tools, but because if they replace a really good like search engine for your magisterial documents, they're actually a much worse tool. Like, I think we'd actually be a lot better. People won't like this because it's not cool to do now. But they just build really great search engines for magisterial documents and sort of have that combined maybe with an AI that does something that does, you know, like, there's just a way to get better, robust information. So it's not a terrible thing to do, but you have to really be careful about how far people are pushing that, like, well, Magisterium AI can now be trusted. We're good with replicating the tradition, which I don't think will ever be able to be the case. And you're always going to get even further biases as somebody can sort of tweak it. As we all know, tradition is complicated. The documents of tradition are complicated, but people that run Magisterium AI don't want it to be complicated. And most AIs are not programmed to be complicated. They're programmed to say, well, this is the answer, not to say, well, this is an ongoing debate between texts from 1824 and 1549, which are actually refuted by the 1920, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not really built to do that. They're built to give simple answers, which is why I sort of have that rather harsh critique that AI can be very much an anti-educational tool, and that it tries to simplify all these complexities. So I don't have a simple answer for you, but I think if you just keep those things in mind, you'll at least be able to come to a better decision as to what to do, and then maybe what to do simultaneously with that. Like, okay, well, if we do that, maybe we should also like find our own web platform that we can also point people to be able to search this more easily or something like this. Oh yeah, over here.
Thank you. This was, I'm really glad I came. This is really,
thank you so
really
much.
interesting. I guess I do agree with the professor from Germany a little bit about specifically that I don't think we can just not use it. I think the students are using it, the society is using it. I have a friend who's an executive at Johnson & Johnson. They just had a lecture in which the guy said, look, if you're replying to emails, if you're writing outlines, if you're making presentations without letting ChatGPT do the base work, you are wasting our money. You're wasting your time. You are being incredibly inefficient.
Yeah.
And even, as a professor, there's a lot that I do every day, like answer emails, like create illustrations or drawings for my lectures, like going hunting into master's committee minutes for the last 3 years. If I feed AI the minutes for the last 3 years, it can answer, have we ever discussed distance education in our conferences? And it'll give a good answer. And since I was at the meetings, I have a check on that. So there's all sorts of things like that that are kind of like a Meet the Jackson cleaning up all the busy work that, it's not, you're not getting good value for your money asking me to do that kind of busy work. And ChatGPT can, if supervised and if.
Was that a question?
So I heard a question there. I think the question was essentially a little bit of an observation, but it was a question that a lot of people in the tech industry and the business industry are pushing AI so strongly that to try to resist it seems sort of impossible, right? I mean, pretty much any field you're going into, executives are out there saying you should be using this for everything. We had a Google VP of YouTube that was at this conference I was at recently, who essentially said the same thing. We are using AI for everything we possibly can in every facet of YouTube as much as we possibly can. And really the interesting study, there's a lot of studies now that are talking about the efficiency of AI in the workplace. And I guess not too surprising part of it is that most of the firing and downsizing that's due to AI doesn't actually have anything to do with efficiency. It simply has to do with employers seeing AI as a potential for more efficiency and thus having an excuse to downsize and to let the shareholders know this is why we're doing it, because AI is going to make us that much more efficient. And then because they've done that, they now have to put pressure on all their people to be so much more efficient and rely even more on AI. There's actually been a study about the translation industry that this has really impacted the last couple of years. But the great irony is that all the translators will tell you is that ChatGPT and stuff are no better than Google Translate from 10 years ago. Like, they're not substantially better than translation tools that we've had for a decade, and yet only now are all these translators losing their jobs and this industry breaking apart because the mindset of AI efficiency is so strong. So I mean, I'm certainly with you. Like I said, I both in my class syllabus have a big page that has a big stop sign on it that says don't use generative AI. But my class is the ethics of AI. Like, we talk about it constantly, right? There's a lot of projects in my class where they have to interact with AI, they have to do all these things. And so I'm certainly not shying away from the pieces. I do think there's, whenever you sort of use AI for something to become dependent upon it, there is danger of it. And I do think all of these businesses that are doing this, I don't know how long that will last. I think a lot of them are doing it hoping that the efficiency will lead to actual efficiency. But like I said, right now, all signs, even people like Sam Altman are talking about the AI bubble right now. All signs are pointing to this as a huge investment, and nobody really knows where the profit margins will come in the future. They're just hoping they will. So I think that's that same sort of analogy can be put upon simply the height of efficiency. Nobody quite knows what will become efficient, what the new workplace will look like, but they're hoping that if they just force everybody to respond to emails with AI, well, I mean, that's my approach the other day. I mean, if students are using AI and faculty are grading with AI, then AI should just get all the degrees anyway. What are we doing? So I think there's some of that. I wonder if Johnson & Johnson, like, is anybody ever reading the emails? Is it just AI reading the email and AI responding? It's an interesting question.
One more question.
Thank you very much. I've had a number of great conversations with people recently, many of them educators or professors on related subjects, and I was wondering if there's one aspect that I've heard from others that I heard some of it in your talk, and I was wondering if maybe you could say more about.
Sure.
And it's so I was speaking with someone who works in this space and is very familiar with how these models actually work, and he was talking about how if you can I forget the term, it's like the temperature of the model, you can turn up or down, meaning how consistently it gives the same response to a particular query or how much variation it permits. And we want more variation because it seems more human in the responses, that it doesn't just always say the same exact thing,
Right.
Which is what a non-LLM computer response is. But he was saying that at the end of the day, even despite this illusion of variation, which resembles kind of creative thought, in fact it's very probabilistic, and effectively what it's doing is giving you, like if there's a bell curve, it's giving you something in the middle of the bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're talking about the great ideas of, you might say, of human history, or in the domain of philosophy or theology, we're often after something that's not in the middle of the bell curve. The most interesting thing is the thing that a lot of people haven't really thought of before. And you really have to get out into the details to find the best creative thing, or the most beautiful thing, or the most profound and insightful thing. Which means that AI, the more we use it, is kind of forcing us away from those insights or homogenizing everything. Could you speak about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the question was sort of related to the notion of generation AI. So some people talk about it like a stochastic parrot. There's a very famous essay that sort of says large language models are stochastic parrots. They take a whole bunch of data points and they repeat back to you something that is generated from that data point. The philosopher John Searle talks about this in his Chinese room analogy, some of you might know, which essentially says if you lock someone in a box and you start feeding this person does not know anything about Chinese, and you start feeding them slips of Chinese, and they have a whole bunch of stacks around them, whenever they feed one back, they get a green light or a red light. And so if they get a green light, they know it's the right thing, and the red light's the wrong thing. Well, they do this hundreds of thousands of times, and eventually the person inside the box is really good at feeding the slip of paper back. But they have no idea what they're saying. They have no sense of knowledge or what it connotes, but they are feeding the paper back, and they're getting green lights all the time. And this is used to understand, right, what is knowledge and intelligence. People use this to talk about an AI as, not really having any sort of agency. And the question was about how AI responses are sort of predictive responses upon likely some sort of bell curve, right? That the AI takes this along all these thousands of dimensions, right? If you ask it like, hey, what's the weather likely to be like 3 years from now in Chicago? It's not going to say, there's no way you can possibly predict that. It's going to give you an answer very confidently. And it's going to do this by putting all these dimensions together and saying, okay, of all of these pieces, here is the most likely answers. And it'll do this in a very complex way, both on a word-by-word basis, as well as on a phrase and a sentence and a paragraph basis. Like I said, it's a very complex way of doing this. You can tweak a little bit here and there. But essentially, yeah, it's saying here's a graph, here's the most likely scenario. And it's never going to give you the outliers because nobody's going to want to hear the outliers, right? Nobody's going to want to hear, well, the reality is in 3 years from now, the world might be over. An asteroid may have hit, and the weather in Chicago won't really matter, right? I'm sure somebody said that somewhere in human history to get a clean response, but an AI will never get that response, right? And this is also why when people talk about AI music or AI poetry, it reads well at first, it can be sort of funny, but the reason that AI slop has become into this vernacular language is because in the end it's just really derivative, right? It has no creativity. It doesn't sort of push those bounds because it's not human, right? It's trying to find what is it that the person really wants to hear. What is it that the person thinks, which is really great when you're studying for business school or you're studying for the LSAT or you're trying to pass a standardized test that the AI has lots of information about. It's a lot worse when you're trying to sort of push the bounds of knowledge or get to sort of a nuance of something. It's never really going to give you, well, the truth of the matter might be in one of those 5% responses and not what everybody's thought in past history. And this is part of that unique inhumanity of generative AI that I was talking about. Because we humans don't work like that. And in fact, I'll give an example to close on. one of my hobbies is sort of playing online chess. It's a lot of fun. I've done it for a couple of years since the pandemic. And the really cool thing about online chess is that it's sort of a great example of AI that can be used really well. So the sort of world chess community is very strict about rules. When you play somebody else in chess, you can never use AI. It would be cheating. But everybody uses AI to practice, to train. Everybody uses AI to analyze games. It's extremely helpful. The AI can beat any player in the world, but that's not really the point, right? So there's a very robust chess community and all this other stuff. But it's also really funny because when you play an AI engine, it's very predictable. And it will almost certainly beat you all the time. But it's really boring chess, right? It'll beat you in ways that are oh yeah, that move, yeah, I didn't see that coming. Whereas you play a person, it's just so much more interesting. Because the person brings the personality. They bring they play this move, and maybe it's a good move, maybe it's not. But you can sort of tell that you're playing a person. Now, probably at that grandmaster level, it's all pretty similar. But when you're sort of at the lower ranks, like I am, playing an AI and playing a person are very different experiences, even if I never see the person, because of those outward things. Because you don't really know, is that person having a bad day, and they should be really aggressive on the chessboard, would be sort of a fun thing to respond against, or are they going to be really cautious because you're doing this? Well, an AI is never going to give you that sense. And I think it's a great way to say, look, this is a great use of AI. I use it to train myself in chess, to analyze my own games all the time, but it doesn't actually push up against what the human experience is and what we can value within that experience. So, thank you so much again.